Good morning, everyone. My name is Kelly Ryan, and I want to thank you for joining JRS USA and the Center for Migration Studies here today. And we're delighted to have you on this important topic. It is my great honor to welcome Robert Cardinal McElroy to speak to us, particularly so soon after his investiture. Cardinal McElroy is the 8th Archbishop of Washington, one of 5 children, and a 5th-generation San Franciscan. He received his bachelor's degree in American history from Harvard in 1975. Cardinal McElroy then attended graduate school at Stanford University, and in 1976 received a master's degree in American history, and in 1989 a doctorate in political science. In 1979, he was granted a master's degree in divinity at St. Patrick's Seminary and a licentiate in sacred theology from the Jesuit School of Theology in Berkeley in 1985. He went on to earn a doctorate in moral theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome in 1987. Cardinal McElroy attended St. Patrick's Seminary in Menlo Park, California, and was ordained a priest of the Archdiocese of San Francisco on April 12, 1980. We look forward to celebrating his 45th anniversary of his priesthood, which also coincides with the 1980 passage of the U.S. Refugee Act and the founding of Jesuit Refugee Service by Father Pedro Arrupi, the Jesuit. In 1995, Archbishop Quinn appointed then Father McElroy Vicar General of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. The following year, then Father McElroy was made a prelate of honor by St. John Paul II and appointed pastor of St. Gregory Parish in San Mateo by Cardinal Levada. Then Bishop McElroy was appointed auxiliary bishop of San Francisco by Pope Benedict XVI on July 6, 2010, and was ordained by Archbishop George Niederera, of St. Mary's Cathedral on September 7, 2010. He became the Archdiocesan Vicar for Parish Life and Development and served in this role until his appointment to be the 6th Bishop of San Diego in March 2015. Pope Francis appointed then Bishop McElroy to the College of Cardinals on May 29, 2022. He was installed in a consistory on August 27th. Cardinal McElroy, the 8th Archbishop of Washington, on January 6, 2025. He is a member of the Vatican's Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development and the Dicastery for Laity and Family Life. Please join me in welcoming His Excellency Cardinal McElroy.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. This is an important topic, particularly at this moment in time, and I'm going to focus on the American situation at this moment. Recently, Pope Francis brought to the fore the parable of the Good Samaritan and said that herein lies the heart of Catholic moral teaching and Catholic social teaching, and understanding what are our obligations. And I would like today to focus in a spiritual and moral way and a reflection on that parable and what the implications of it are for us today. A reading from the Gospel of Luke. Said, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus said to him, "What is written in the law? How do you read it?" He said, in reply, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your being, with all your strength." Jesus replied to him, "You have answered correctly. Do this and you will live." But because he wished to justify himself, he said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man fell to Jericho. They stripped and beat him and went off, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down that road. When he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Likewise, a Levite came to the place, and when he saw him, he passed by on the opposite side. Came upon him. was moved with compassion at the sight. He approached the victim, poured oil and wine over his wounds, and bandaged them. Then he lifted him up on his own animal, took him to an inn, and cared for him. The next day he take care of him. If you spend more than what I have given to you, I shall repay you on my way back. Which of these three, in your opinion, was neighbor to the robber's victim? He answered, the one who treated and do likewise. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis' wonderful reflection, profound reflection upon the meaning of this parable. The Pope takes in turn each of the figures of this parable and asks us to look deeper at each one to understand the meaning of that reality and also to understand how that reality exists in every one of us. And I think that's the real power, is that latter. The Pope begins first with the priest and the Levite. They're going down the road on their daily tasks. And they pass on. What is going on here? What is in their hearts? Indifference. Indifference is the fact that each of us becomes so preoccupied with our own well-being and concerns and needs that we cease to be compassionate in the compelling and deep and profound and Christ-like sense of that world. Indifference sees the reality, but it ceases to let it in. It refuses to let it into the human heart, to make it a claim upon us and thus be spurred to action. But there is another factor here. Many scripture scholars tell us that this was a particularly dangerous route and that there were robbers commonly along this route. And thus, in addition to the indifference that might have characterized the priest and the Levite, there is also fear. Is that man lying there really victimized? Is he dead? Is he alive? Is this a trap? It is fear as well as indifference, which they are trapped and cannot come to that compassion which Jesus calls us to. Some years ago, I was talking about the parable of the Good Samaritan to a retreat with deacons and their wives. And when I said about this parable, I said, the priest and the Levite passed on. And I said, if it had been a bishop, he would have stopped. And one of the men jokingly yelled out, yes, because he would have had two deacons with him to do all the work. But I think we have to wrestle with this figure of the priest and the Levite in our own hearts and souls, because all of us at times shut ourselves out from that compassion which Christ calls us to. Part of us is because there's so much suffering that surrounds it. We've got to remember the call of Jesus is constant. That lie around us, to perceive it and then to act. And after talking about the priest and the Levite, Pope Francis talks about the victim lying by the side of the road. What desperation and hopelessness must be sinking in for him. Each of us, Francis says, at times in this world is the victim. In which we feel others are merely passing by, not paying attention. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. In which each of us feel, is that on? Okay. In which each of us feel alone and in suffering, and others are merely passing by. And it is important, Francis says, to understand the parable, to recognize this experience in our own lives. Because only when we do so can we see ourselves in right relation with the Good Samaritan, the one who comes to action, the one who saves us. Then there are the figures of the robbers. We don't see them, but we see what they have done. And Francis says, each of us in our own lives is also the robber. Each of us at times victimizes others consciously in a variety of different ways. When we place our own interests and well-being ahead of others and truly cause harm. We must be in touch with that side of ourselves and with the darkness which is the robber inside every one of us, and recognize that is one of the great calls of Christian conversion, to root out that darkness, to face it where it lies, and to fight against it always. And then we have the figure of the Good Samaritan, the centerpiece of the gospel. The Good Samaritan is a foreigner. This is so crucial to the parable. A foreigner and a stranger, and in that society in which he was living, an outcast. And yet he comes by and he sees the man lying by the side of the road. And he stops. He overcomes the danger and the indifference, and he stops and lifts the man up, helps him on his donkey, and takes him and cares for him so that he might be well and rescued from his suffering. This is the example of the figure that each of us is called to be. One who sacrifices and thinks of others in their hardship and in their suffering, and who is not bound by the chains of indifference or fear to let that suffering go by and merely walk along. In a very real way today, I think this reflection can help us to understand the moment we are in our country, particularly within the framework of the work of refugee and migration services. If we look at the figure of the robber, at this moment, I think we must say to ourselves quite clearly and categorically, the suspension of agency for international development monies for humanitarian relief is moral theft from the poorest and the most desperate men, women, and children in our world today. It is unconscionable through any prism of Catholic thought. And thus we who are in the work of helping migrants and refugees, in this case, are merely in the work of helping humanity as it exists in suffering, to understand that giving less than 1% of our government's budget to assist the most desperate humanitarian needs of the world is our obligation as people of faith and as a nation. In the book of Genesis, we see the beauty of God's creation, which is bestowed as gift upon each and every one of us. And it points so powerfully to the universal destination of material goods, which Catholic social thought teaches is at the heart of understanding material goods in our world. And in light of that, how can we not think that this action in eliminating our government's meager but so crucial assistance to those who are in need for clinics and health and vaccines and food services throughout the world is not utterly contrary to everything about this gospel and about our life as disciples of Jesus Christ. Last week, in the readings, we had the story of Lazarus and the rich man. Lazarus, who sees the feasting going on every day in the rich man's house, and yet is given nothing, not even the scraps that are left for the dogs. And we see God's judgment upon that inequity, but not just inequity, that coldness and indifference. And we have to ask ourselves as a people, is that the judgment God places on us now? Who in the parable is the figure of the undocumented immigrant? We're compelled to say it is the victim in the moment in which we are living. Because in this moment in which mass deportation is the national goal of our government, every undocumented person, and not only every undocumented person, but as we all know, equally, every one member of their families lives in fear. And it is a purposeful fear. It is a fear meant to generate deportation. It is a fear meant to arrest normalcy in our society and integration into our society. It is a fear which uproots everybody's understanding of the bonds which so many undocumented men and women and children and families have formed in our society in the often decades that they have been here. The undocumented are victims of this moment and of these policies. And we as a church need to advocate continually for our solidarity with them and for their dignity as human persons. And we must not only advocate, but we must act in support of them in every way possible. I come from San Diego. Up until 2 weeks ago, I was the Bishop of San Diego, where we are right on the border. Probably 10% of our Catholic population is undocumented there. And what the families are feeling, and I say families because it's not just the undocumented who live in fear, but everyone who loves them live now in fear. And their lives are being upended in a purposeful way. And there is great resiliency. It's always struck me how great the resiliency of the undocumented are in these periods of time. I remember some years ago when we were facing these issues, some of the mothers would tell me that, they text each other as to if there's an ice truck in front of the school they're going to, and how do they support one another, and they pick up their other kids. All these areas of resiliency, but now the resiliency is not going to be strong enough to overcome the misery and fear that is being accomplished now. At the same time, while we first say, who is the undocumented in this story? It is the victim at this moment, our history. That's not the primary character in the story who is the undocumented. The primary character in the story who represents the undocumented is the Good Samaritan. And that's what we have to give witness to. The Good Samaritan is a man of faith and sacrifice and compassion and care. And by and large, the undocumented men and women and children of families that live in our midst are that too. And we cannot surrender that. We cannot focus primarily on this notion of the undocumented and their suffering and being victims. We have to reclaim the notion in our culture and our society that they are the Good Samaritan. They sacrifice for their families. They work hard and they build up our society. They bring good values to our nation. They bring a sense of solidarity, a strong sense of family, of what it means to give up so that your child can have a better life. This is the fight I think we have primarily, and it's what Pope Francis was talking about in that letter to the American bishops. I think he got it precisely right. He said, what's wrong here is to focus upon those who are undocumented as criminals, as if that captures the reality of who they are. It does not. They are exactly the type of people that we wish to come to our nation, to help build it up, to make it more beautiful, to make it a place where so many of the values which are atrophying in our society with its secularism are replaced by faith and by a sense there is something greater than the individual here. This is the culture that our immigrants, by and large, bring to us. And it is a message we desperately need in our society. And I think this really is the greatest challenge, that we come to understand once again and reclaim our heritage as our nation, that we are a people that were built by immigrants of every generation who came in that very same way, all of them desperate in so many ways, seeking a new life for themselves and their families. We must make that the centerpiece as a church of how we respond to this. Yes, understanding the suffering and being in solidarity with our undocumented men and women and children and families as they are victimized. But more importantly, helping our society recognize these are the type of people we want among us. These are the type of people that our society needs if it is to come back to some of these cultural elements of the common good, of care for others, and of compassion, which really need to be at the heart of who we are as a people and who we profess to be. And this brings us into grappling with the dark side of our history. Because while the legacy of our history is we're a nation of immigrants, this has also been a legacy of exclusion of immigrants, of denigration of immigrants, of caricature of immigrants. Most of us who sit in this room have forebears who came here, who knew what the scourge of that was, of being considered inimical to a good American society. When the Irish came, when the Polish came, when the Italians came. It was mentioned earlier, about 100 years ago when the Exclusion Act, or when the Naturalization Act came in, that was also the decade in which the most popular book of the decade was called The Passing of the Great Race. And what it was, this is a theme that is not unfamiliar to us. This is the 1920s. The passing of the great race, its thesis was that we as a Christian white nation are being undermined by a culture which is destroying the true American culture. And they were talking about Italians and Poles. This is the dark side of our history. And we must continually wrestle with this. And we are in a moment where we must wrestle with those same themes now. There are many people who oppose immigration on the very position that they think our borders should be secure. And that is Catholic teaching. Many people who are seeking stronger security at the border do so out of a sense of that stronger security at the border. That is a legitimate goal. And the exclusion of those who are truly guilty of serious crimes or undocumented is also a legitimate goal. And we must understand that in our discussion. And we can't lump everyone together. But we must always also understand the many themes that are supporting the effort to undermine the rights and the human dignity of the undocumented come from the blackest hearts of our history and from the belief that our culture is being undermined. That's why we must point to the undocumented as the true good Samaritans in this. Not all of them, but the vast majority are here for the same reason that people came to our country and built it up. And the final characters in the parable of the Good Samaritan are the priest and the Levite. And if the message we are to give has to focus on the Good Samaritan and the good immigrant, the audience that we really need to try to reach most powerfully in heart and soul are the priest and the Levite, of those who walk by with indifference or fear, both of which are present in this debate at this moment. And we must understand it's present with our own hearts and with our own institutions also. We have to struggle with this. We have to overcome the indifference. We have to face it for what it is. We have to get beyond it. And that's by understanding what is at the core of what Jesus is talking about in the parable. If you truly wish to be my follower, you must in your heart and your soul have that love for the stranger, which the Good Samaritan exhibited, and take the risk which the Good Samaritan did for the stranger. If you are to be my disciple truly in this world at this moment, that is what you must do. We're faced with as a society with two different choices here. And partly it's a result, as was mentioned before, that we've had a broken system for so long. Both parties have been at fault for failing to reach an accord on immigration reform for substantial policy. And looking back, each of us can point to moments where it could have happened if people had merely taken the right step and not the partisan step. But here is where we are. And now we face two different pathways. The first pathway, which Catholic social teaching would support and does support, is to change our laws so that they have secure borders and dignity for the treatment of everyone at those borders, and a generous asylum and refugee policy. That is one pathway we as a nation can come toward. And I actually believe most Americans would be in favor of that pathway. The other pathway is a crusade, which comes from the darkest parts of our American psyche and soul and history. The crusade denigrates the undocumented. It labels them as defective. It castigates them and captures them and encapsulates them as criminals. It refuses to see the human being that is there and the good that they have already accomplished in the society in which they have been living for so many years. These are the two choices we have. And we as a nation will have to make one choice. The pathway of crusade and mass deportation cannot be followed in conscience by those who call themselves disciples of Jesus Christ. And we must work to make sure that that does not happen in this nation in which we live, in which we love, and which we care for so deeply. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cardinal McElroy. We have a brief presentation for you. Today is the 40th anniversary, 45th. I'm bad at math. It's 1980, 45th anniversary of it's the feast day of St. Oscar Romero and also the 45th anniversary of his death. So let me turn the floor to you all.
My name is Scott Wright, and this is Jean Stoken. And on behalf, I think I speak for all of us present online and here today, our profound gratitude to you, Cardinal McElroy, for your words today, but also for your a lifetime commitment. And it's a happy occasion that this gathering of Jesuit Refugee Services Center for Migration Studies and all of us present, which signifies a profound solidarity with migrants and refugees. Today is also the 45th anniversary of Archbishop and now Saint Oscar Romero. I had the good fortune to work 8 years during the Civil War in El Salvador with migrants, with refugees and displaced communities, and Jean in solidarity during those years through the Share Foundation based in San Francisco. And I just want to say personally, your words remind me, and I think touched all of us, just 2 or 3 days before Archbishop Romero was assassinated, he was interviewed by a journalist, and his words were, "Don't forget that we are people and we are fleeing to the mountains to take refuge." And I think you remind us not to forget, not to be indifferent, but to be committed and in solidarity. So we ask the intercession of now Saint Oscar Romero upon your ministry in this archdiocese, that he grants you courage, wisdom, and guidance, and to all of us within this archdiocese to support you in that ministry. Thank you.
And it's quite providential that today's gospel reading is about a prophet who is not accepted in their homeland, in their town. We of this town say you are very welcomed and needed at this moment. Thank you, prophet.
I just want to say this is particularly meaningful to me because when I was preparing to be ordained a priest, I was going to be a priest of San Francisco, and Archbishop John Quinn, who was president of the Bishops' Conference at the time, we were gathered together at dinner and received a call from President Carter saying that Archbishop Romero had been assassinated. So it's always been, he's been a great figure to all of us, I know, as a man of strength and courage and love. And he was truly a good Samaritan and a good priest. Thank you very much.